Censorship is just society's way of hiding its own sickness. While modern audiences pat themselves on the back for pushing boundaries, they conveniently forget the 1960s, a decade where filmmakers didn't ask for permission. These aren't your polished Hollywood thrillers. They are ugly, visceral, and completely forbidden. Here are 18 brutal 60s exploitation films that are still banned in multiple countries today. 1. Blood Feast, 1963. You can trace the birth of modern gore directly back to this nauseating masterpiece. Directed by the infamous Herschel Gordon Lewis, Blood Feast was marketed as the first film to show exactly what a murder looks like. It follows an eccentric caterer named Fuad Ramses, who murders young women to harvest their body parts for an ancient Egyptian banquet. The practical effects are notoriously crude, yet undeniably shocking for 1963. Legs are hacked off, tongues are ripped out, and brains are scooped from skulls in a vibrant, sickening crimson. The film was immediately seized by police in several states, facing intense obscenity charges. Even today, countries like Finland and Norway maintain strict bans on the uncut version, deeming it too gratuitously violent. Lewis didn't care about art. He cared about spectacle. He wanted to shock suburban America out of its complacency, and he succeeded. Critics universally despised it, calling it a vile abomination, but audiences flocked to drive-ins in droves. It proved there was a massive market for on-screen carnage. The legacy of Blood Feast is permanently stained in blood. It opened the floodgates for the splatter genre, proving that censors could be bypassed if you marketed your film directly to the rebellious youth. It remains a banned, stomach-churning relic of true underground exploitation cinema. 2. 2000 Maniacs, 1964. Herschel Gordon Lewis doubled down on his blood-soaked formula with this deeply unsettling Southern Gothic nightmare. A group of northern tourists is lured into the sleepy town of Pleasant Valley, where the ghostly citizens are celebrating the centennial of the Civil War. Their idea of a celebration involves brutally slaughtering the Yankees in bizarre, prolonged methods. One victim is crushed in a barrel lined with nails and rolled down a hill, while another is dismembered in a carnival game. The juxtaposition of cheerful, banjo-playing locals with graphic, agonizing murder creates a deeply disturbing atmosphere. The film's satirical edge did not save it from the censor's wrath. It was banned in the United Kingdom for decades, only receiving a heavily cut certificate years later. Several other countries still refuse to classify it, citing its cruel and unusual sadism. What makes 2000 Maniacs so uniquely repulsive is how much the killers enjoy the torture. There is no psychological depth here, just pure, unadulterated vengeance disguised as a folk horror musical. Lewis pushed the boundaries of bad taste so far that censors simply gave up trying to understand it, opting to ban it entirely instead. It stands as a brutal testament to a time when independent filmmakers could produce outright snuff-adjacent entertainment and get away with it, albeit very briefly. 3. Mondo Cane, 1962. This isn't a traditional narrative film, but rather a grotesque pseudo-documentary that birthed the Mondo genre. Translating to A Dog's World, it parades across the globe, showcasing bizarre cultural practices under the guise of education. However, it quickly devolves into a voyeuristic freak show. Viewers are subjected to genuine animal slaughter, ritualistic mutilations, and shocking scenes of human degradation, all narrated with a falsely somber tone. The filmmakers staged several sequences to maximize the shock value, blurring the line between reality and sick fiction. Because it featured real death and extreme cruelty, Mondo Cane faced immediate international backlash. It was banned in multiple countries, including Australia and parts of Europe, for its unethical treatment of animals, an exploitative depiction of indigenous peoples. Censors recognized the film for what it truly was, a highbrow excuse to stare at taboo subjects. The damage was irreversible, spawning countless imitation films that raced to capture even more disturbing footage. Mondo Cane normalized the commodification of real-world suffering for entertainment. Decades later, its uncut version remains prohibited in several territories due to animal welfare laws and obscenity statutes. It is a chilling reminder that the most banned films aren't always fiction. Sometimes, they are just cameras pointed at the darkest corners of human nature, exploiting real pain for a cheap box office ticket sale. 4. Africa Addio, 1966. If Mondo Cane was the spark, Africa Addio was an absolute wildfire of controversy. Presented as a documentary chronicling the decolonization of Africa, it is actually a heavily manipulated, racist bloodbath. The directors captured real executions, mass graves, and horrifying instances of animal poaching. Instead of contextualizing the violence of the era, the film gleefully lingers on the carnage, portraying the collapse of colonial rule as an apocalyptic descent into savagery. The most infamous sequences involve the brutal, on-camera slaughter of elephants, hippos, and other endangered animals, which prompted global outrage. It was universally condemned by critics and banned in dozens of countries, including Italy, where the filmmakers faced criminal charges for defamation and obscenity. The uncut version remains strictly prohibited in many nations today due to its explicit real-world violence and deeply offensive racial politics. Africa Audio is not cinema. It is a snuff film dressed up as anthropology. The directors hid behind a veil of journalism to capture atrocities without intervening, making them complicit in the very horrors they filmed. It represents the absolute darkest endpoint of 1960s exploitation, a film so morally bankrupt and visually terrifying that governments decided it was safer to lock it away forever than let the public see its unflinching real-life horrors. 5. The Defilers, 1965. Before the slasher genre codified its rules, this grimy exploitation flick distilled the essence of cinematic sadism into a relentlessly unpleasant experience. The Defilers follows two wealthy, bored teenage delinquents who decide to kidnap a young innocent girl simply for kicks. What follows is an agonizing depiction of captivity, psychological torture, and eventual brutalization in a filthy basement. There are no supernatural elements, no redeeming moral lessons, and no heroic rescuers, just pure, unfiltered misogyny and cruelty. The film was part of the notorious roughy subgenre, which traded the playful nudie-cutie vibes of the early 60s for harsh, uncompromising violence against women. Due to its grim subject matter and the terrifying realism of the abduction, The Defilers was seized by authorities and banned in several countries. Censors deemed it an instructional guide for depravity, arguing it had absolutely no social value whatsoever. Even today, it remains restricted in parts of Europe and the UK. The sheer lack of empathy the filmmakers have for their victim is staggering. It doesn't titillate or thrill. It just makes the viewer feel dirty. The Defilers stands as a banned relic of a truly lawless era of filmmaking, where violating the audience's sense of safety was the ultimate, twisted, and highly profitable financial goal. 6. Faster, Pussycat. Kill, Kill. 1965. Russ Meyer was the king of the sexploitation genre. But this film crossed too many lines for the prudish censors of the mid-60s. It follows three violent, hypersexual go-go dancers who embark on a murderous rampage across the California desert, kidnapping a young couple and terrorizing an elderly, lecherous man. The film is a hyper-violent, campy explosion of female rage, featuring gratuitous violence, twisted sexuality, and brutal femicide. While viewed today as a feminist cult classic, authorities at the time saw it as a dangerous corrupter of youth. It was banned in several countries, most notably in the United Kingdom, where it was refused a certificate entirely until 2001. The censors were particularly appalled by the scene where a man is killed by having his neck snapped with bare thighs, viewing it as an obscene mix of sex and lethal violence. Faster, Pussycat was too loud, too aggressive, and far too unapologetic for a society still clinging to 1950s morality. The women in the film aren't victims. They are predatory monsters, which terrified the establishment. Its banning only cemented its legendary status, proving that nothing sells tickets quite like outright government condemnation. It remains a fiercely protected, controversial masterpiece that still occasionally faces localized, puritanical bans. 7. I Am Curious, Yellow, 1967. This Swedish arthouse film ignited a firestorm that reached the United States Supreme Court. Mixing radical political discourse with explicit, unsimulated sexual content, it follows a young woman exploring her sexuality and her leftist political beliefs. It features graphic full-frontal nudity and a highly controversial scene where the protagonist kisses her lover's flaccid penis. When it was imported to America, customs agents seized the prints, declaring the film obscene. The ensuing legal battle lasted years, temporarily halting its distribution. While it was eventually legalized in the US, the uncut version remains banned or heavily restricted in numerous conservative countries to this day, including parts of the Middle East and Asia. The controversy stemmed from its brazen blending of intellectual pretension with hardcore pornography. Censors couldn't handle the fact that a film treating serious political topics would also show explicit sexual acts so casually. I Am Curious, Yellow, shattered the illusion that European art was inherently highbrow and safe. It was a Trojan horse for the sexual revolution, weaponizing controversy to force society to confront its hypocritical attitudes toward the human body. Even where it isn't strictly legally banned today, it remains heavily suppressed on mainstream platforms, a ghost of the ultimate, culture-defining cinematic taboo battle. 8. The Awful Dr. Orloff, 1962. This Spanish-French horror film brought an unprecedented level of sadism to European screens, paving the way for the giallo genre. It tells the story of a blind doctor who, with the help of a grotesque, mute assistant, kidnaps beautiful women to harvest their skin in hopes of restoring his daughter's disfigured face. The film is drenched in a suffocating atmosphere of dread, featuring chilling scenes of women being stalked, paralyzed with a poisoned needle, and surgically mutilated. While tame by modern slasher standards, its fusion of graphic surgical horror and sexualized violence was deeply shocking in 1962. The film was banned in the United Kingdom for over a decade, with the BPLFC citing its gruesome, unnerving depictions of terror and sadism. Several other countries immediately classified it as an adult-only horror, effectively banning it from general release. What disturbed censors the most was the clinical, emotionless way the murders were presented. Dr. Orloff didn't kill out of rage. He killed out of a perverted, twisted sense of scientific necessity. This cold, calculated brutality made the film feel dangerously real. It remains a heavily censored cult classic today, with certain uncut versions still prohibited in territories with strict anti-violence laws, a testament to its enduring power to unsettle and disturb audiences. 9. Scorpio Rising, 1963. Kenneth Anger's avant-garde short film is a psychedelic, homoerotic fever dream that shattered every 1960s cinematic taboo. It intercuts footage of a group of leather-clad bikers preparing for a rally with clips of Christ, Nazi rallies, and pop culture icons, all set to a driving soundtrack of 1950s pop songs. The film is unapologetically queer, celebrating male sexuality, fetish gear, and anti-authoritarian rebellion in a way that mainstream society found deeply threatening. It was immediately hit with obscenity charges across the United States. Police raided theaters, and the film was banned in California and New York. Even today, uncut versions face restrictions or outright bans in heavily conservative nations due to its blatant homosexuality and blasphemous imagery. Anger didn't just push the envelope, he set it on fire. By equating biker culture with queer identity and mixing it with fascist iconography, he created a cinematic Molotov cocktail. Censors couldn't comprehend the artistic merit, seeing only degeneracy and moral decay. Scorpio Rising was too gay, too weird, and too subversive for the establishment. Its banning only elevated it to mythic status among counterculture radicals, solidifying its place as a permanently controversial, brilliantly banned piece of underground art that still feels dangerous and subversive to watch. 10. Flaming Creatures, 1963. If Scorpio Rising was subversive, Jack Smith's Flaming Creatures was an outright declaration of war against cinematic normalcy. Shot on a rooftop in New York, this experimental film features a bizarre cast of drag queens, hermaphrodites, and bizarrely costumed figures engaging in a simulated, chaotic orgy. The camera leers at flaccid penises, exposed breasts, and exaggerated makeup in a grainy, hypnotic haze. There is no plot, only a celebration of pure, unpolished sexual otherness. The establishment reacted with absolute fury. The film was seized by police almost immediately upon release, and the censor boards in New York and Pennsylvania officially banned it, taking the case all the way to the Supreme Court. It remains banned in multiple countries to this day, heavily restricted due to its full frontal nudity and deeply transgressive portrayal of gender fluidity. In the 1960s, the mere suggestion that gender could be performed or mocked was enough to trigger mass panic. Flaming Creatures was deemed medically dangerous, accused of corrupting the youth and destroying the moral fabric of society. It is a messy, chaotic, and brilliant nightmare that refuses to play by any rules, retaining its banned status in conservative regions as a stubborn middle finger to puritanical, outdated control. 11. She-Freak, 1967. This grimy, low-budget exploitation flick takes the classic circus horror trope and violently drags it through the deepest mud imaginable. Produced by the notorious David F. Friedman, it follows a cold, ruthlessly ambitious waitress who marries a wealthy carnival owner, systematically plotting the murders of anyone who stands in her way of gaining power. The film operates as a remarkably slow burn of pure, unadulterated misanthropy, building to a horrifying climax where the villainess finally gets her gruesome comeuppance by being surgically transformed into a literal sideshow attraction. A drooling, hideous mutant locked in a cage. While it deliberately avoids the bright red blood typical of Herschel Gordon Lewis, She-Freak compensates with an overwhelming, suffocating atmosphere of sleaze, cheapness, and profound psychological brutality. The film strips away any romanticism associated with the traveling circus, replacing it with a terrifying realm of cheap beer, sweaty carnies, and inescapable doom. It was banned in several international markets due to its extreme thematic cruelty and the horrifying, extended climax, focusing on bodily transformation and public humiliation. Censors specifically found the film's punitive, torturous ending to be excessively sadistic, even by the incredibly low standards of 1960s exploitation pictures. The uncut version remains effectively banned in the UK and Australia, deliberately hidden away due to its deeply disturbing themes of involuntary mutilation and total dehumanization. She-Freak represents the absolute epitome of ugly 60s cinema. It stubbornly offers no heroes, no hope, and absolutely no redemption, only a grimy, intensely cynical worldview where everyone is inherently a monster. Its continued banned status is a lasting testament to its unique ability to make audiences feel genuinely uncomfortable, violated, and profoundly, inescapably grimy. 12. Lorna, 1964. Lorna is often credited with single-handedly inventing the sexploitation feature film, but its incredibly toxic mix of sexuality and violence made it an instant, massive target for the censor's banhammer. It tells the story of a sexually unsatisfied young married woman living in rural America who is brutally raped by an escaped convict, an act that the film bizarrely suggests awakens her deeply repressed, primal desires. The film treats sexual violence with a disturbing, highly manipulative casualness, deliberately blurring the dangerous line between horrific rape and willing seduction in a way that is utterly reprehensible by any modern standard. Meyer's use of a patronizing, pseudo-psychological narrator only amplifies the sleaze, attempting to legitimize the on-screen degradation under the guise of scholarly analysis. When it was initially released, the uncut version was aggressively banned in numerous American states and entirely prohibited from exhibition in countries like the UK and Ireland. Censors were absolutely horrified by the film's explicit, pervasive nudity, combined with its deeply problematic, damaging suggestion that women secretly desire brutal, violent sexual encounters. Meyer intentionally pushed the boundaries of what was legally permissible on screen, aggressively testing the absolute limits of the First Amendment. While it eventually helped to dismantle the restrictive production code in America, Lorna remains officially banned or heavily censored in several international markets today. It is a deeply uncomfortable, infuriating watch. A film that blatantly exploits the severe trauma of sexual assault for cheap titillation and box office profit. Its permanently suppressed status is completely understandable, serving as a dark, ugly reminder of how casually 60s cinema treated the autonomy of women's bodies. 13. The Acid Eaters, 1967. This utterly unhinged film is a definitive time capsule of the absolute worst, most hysterical fears regarding the 1960s counterculture, essentially functioning as a feature-length moral panic attack. It follows a group of incredibly bland suburban adults who foolishly decide to drop LSD, leading to a chaotic, completely depraved descent into wild orgies, pseudo-satanic rituals, and total mental collapse. The filmmakers had absolutely zero interest in accurately portraying the psychedelic experience. Instead, they deliberately crafted a hysterical, wildly exploitative nightmare, designed specifically to terrify conservative parents and enrage local moral guardians. The film's climax, featuring a garishly costumed Satan presiding over a stoned, writhing mass of naked bodies, perfectly encapsulates the era's paranoid delusions. Because of its rampant, unapologetic drug use, explicit sexual content, and deeply blasphemous imagery, The Acid Eaters was quickly banned in multiple countries. Outraged censors viewed it as a dangerous instructional guide for moral decay, genuinely fearing it would somehow encourage impressionable teenagers to experiment with hallucinogens and engage in deviant group sex. Even today, the fully uncut version is strictly prohibited in several conservative territories around the world. The film is undeniably a masterpiece of terrible taste, shamelessly reveling in the perceived filth of the hippie movement. It explicitly presents drug use not as a spiritual awakening, but as a terrifying, one-way ticket to sexual psychosis and permanent brain damage. Its ongoing ban status is almost comical in retrospect, given how incredibly cheesy and cheap the film actually is, but its utterly unapologetic embrace of every available taboo subject keeps it permanently locked in the vaults of forbidden cinema. 14. Orgy of the Dead, 1965. Written by the infamous horror icon Ed Wood. This film is a surreal, completely nonsensical descent into pure, unfiltered exploitation trash. The paper-thin plot involves a young couple crashing their car and somehow stumbling upon a spooky graveyard where the flamboyant Emperor of the Dead, played by a wildly overacting Criswell, presides over a macabre, highly erotic ritual. What follows is an endlessly repetitive, mind-numbing parade of exotic dancers being magically summoned from their graves to perform agonizingly long stripteases for a captive audience of shambling zombies and cheaply disguised werewolves. There is essentially no plot, only thinly veiled necrophilia and utterly gratuitous, completely disconnected nudity. Due to its extreme thematic content, brazenly mixing death, the undead, and highly explicit sexual displays, Orgy of the Dead was immediately banned in several countries. Disgusted censors found the heavily necrophilic undertones to be deeply offensive, morally corrosive, and completely unacceptable for public consumption. Wood's notoriously clumsy direction, combined with the grotesque makeup and the unsettlingly joyless nature of the dancing, creates an atmosphere not of eroticism, but of profound, unsettling wrongness that censors found impossible to ignore or justify. The film doesn't just push conventional boundaries, it completely obliterates them in the most incompetent, bizarrely fascinating way possible. The completely uncut version remains strictly restricted or outright banned in parts of Europe and the Middle East. It is a fascinatingly awful piece of cinematic history, a film so completely devoid of basic taste or logic that it loops back around to being genuinely subversive. Ed Wood somehow managed to create a film so uniquely perverse that censors are still deeply wary of letting its uncut form see the light of day. 15. The Torture Chamber of Dr. Sadism, 1967. Originally released under the title The Blood Demon, this German Gothic horror film takes the loose historical legend of Count Saint-Germain and violently transforms it into a grotesque carnival of sadistic cruelty. Starring a visibly embarrassed Christopher Lee.
So you had the cross.
The convoluted plot involves a resurrected aristocrat who systematically lures the innocent descendants of those who wronged him to his oppressive castle, subjecting them to a series of incredibly elaborate, gruesome, medieval torture devices. The film opens with an incredibly brutal, drawn-out execution by carriage that sets a terrifying, merciless tone for the ensuing runtime.
Here we are!
Making it clear that no character is safe from the director's sadistic gaze. It features giant swinging pendulum blades, dark snake pits, and a truly horrifying climax involving a massive pit of boiling tar. While Christopher Lee's prestigious name gave it a thin, deceptive veneer of respectability, the sheer, unrelenting volume of graphic, highly prolonged torture was far too much for international censors. It was outright banned in the United Kingdom for several years. Heavily sliced to ribbons in the United States, and remains strictly prohibited in its uncut form in several countries today. The BFLFC specifically and officially cited the film's unrelenting, voyeuristic sadism and the disproportionate, graphic cruelty inflicted upon helpless female victims as the primary reasons for the ban. The Torture Chamber of Dr. Sadism isn't just a standard horror movie, it is a grueling, tedious exercise in endurance.
You will take your mother's place. I have the blood of...
It deliberately wallows in the prolonged agony of its characters, presenting horrific medieval torture as a highly voyeuristic spectacle. Its permanent censored status is a decisive victory for those who fiercely oppose gratuitous cinematic torture. Color Me Blood Red, 1965. YTS Herschel Gordon Lewis completed his infamous Blood trilogy with this deeply disturbing blend of art criticism and literal cannibalism. The film follows a struggling, temperamental painter who discovers that human blood is the perfect medium to make his artwork vibrant and critically successful. Driven completely mad by his newfound inspiration, he begins murdering young women on the beach, slashing their throats to drain their blood directly onto his canvases. The premise is undeniably absurd, but the execution is pure, unadulterated gore. Lewis showcases extreme close-ups of victims being brutally carved up,
Over before you even get there. We like it, Mother.
Their blood explicitly collected in buckets and sloppily smeared across the framework of his paintings. Like its predecessors, Color Me Blood Red was banned in multiple countries upon release. Finland and Norway outright refused to classify it, and the UK heavily censored it for decades, removing the most graphic slashing sequences entirely. Censors were particularly appalled by the gleeful, almost cheerful way the film merged high art with extreme, visceral violence. It felt like a deliberate insult to both traditional morality and high culture. The completely uncut version remains banned in several territories today, viewed as an excessively violent relic of a bygone, unregulated era.
Me out to the ball game, Dad. They're playing games at night.
It is a testament to Lewis's relentless commitment to shocking his audience. A film so drenched in cheap fake blood and real-world controversy that governments decided it was simply too grotesque for public consumption. It stands as exploitation cinema at its most shamelessly, unapologetically bloodthirsty, turning the creative process into a literal, incredibly messy, and terrifying slaughterhouse. 17. Sin in the Suburbs, 1964. Director Joseph W. Sarno specialized in exposing the hidden, seedy underbelly of American middle-class life, and this film was his most controversial, devastating takedown. It explores a secret network of suburban housewives and bored husbands engaging in illicit swingers parties, unchecked teenage delinquency, and predatory older men systematically grooming naive young girls.
Anything. I can't. I have no...
There are no murders or monsters here, just an overwhelming, suffocating atmosphere of moral rot, marital betrayal, and highly explicit sexuality. The film's unflinching look at rampant suburban infidelity and the blatant sexualization of teenagers made it public enemy number one for local censor boards across the nation. It was aggressively banned in numerous U.S. states and completely prohibited from screening in several foreign markets. Censors vehemently argued that the film presented a degenerate, highly distorted view of the pristine American family, accusing it of being pure pornography, cleverly disguised as serious social commentary. The uncut version remains officially banned in certain countries to this day due to its dark themes of statutory corruption and utterly pervasive nudity. Sin in the Suburbs was incredibly dangerous because it felt uncomfortably real. It didn't rely on vampires, monsters, or fake blood. It relied entirely on the very real, paranoid fears of parents losing control of their perfect neighborhoods. Its continued ban status highlights how terrified conservative authorities still are of films that dare to expose the hypocritical, hidden sexual desires lurking behind closed suburban, white picket fence doors of supposedly polite society. 18. The Thrill Killers, 1964. Directed by Richard Rush, this incredibly bleak and violently unforgiving film blurs the line between standard crime drama and outright horror. It follows a trio of violently deranged, escaped mental patients who embark on a senseless, completely random killing spree across the sprawling city of Los Angeles. They don't have a master plan. They just want to inflict maximum pain and watch innocent people die. The film is genuinely shocking in its casual brutality, featuring disturbingly prolonged scenes of innocent bystanders being shot, brutally stabbed, and psychologically terrorized for absolutely no narrative reason. It completely lacks the campy, fun elements of other exploitation films, opting instead for a grim, documentary-like realism that deeply unsettled theatrical audiences. Because of its utterly random, unprovoked violence and the terrifying lack of motivation behind the chaotic killings, The Thrill Killers was immediately banned in several countries. Censors officially deemed it a dangerous, nihilistic piece of subversive work that directly glorified unrepentant psychopathy. The uncut version remains strictly restricted in parts of Europe and the UK today. It serves as a deeply disturbing precursor to the random, motiveless violence seen in later cinematic masterpieces like Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, but the 1960s censor boards were entirely unprepared for its relentlessly bleak worldview. By stubbornly refusing to offer any moral justification or a satisfying, righteous revenge arc, The Thrill Killers firmly cemented its permanent, heavily documented status as a banned, utterly ruthless, unforgiving, completely inescapable cinematic nightmare. These films remain locked in vaults, not because they are masterpieces, but because they hold a mirror up to humanity's darkest impulses. Censorship is a slippery slope, yet it is hard to defend movies that traded in genuine suffering just to make a quick buck. The 1960s exploitation era was a wild, lawless frontier of cinema that we will likely never see again. Did we miss any band nightmares? Tell us in the comments, if you dare.